So this is video 3 of 4. In this video, we're going to talk about broadbanding and salary structures. So broadbanding creates fewer, wider pay grades. And I'll show an example using some of the graphics from the book. There are two types of broadbands. We can talk about broadbands, which are just wide ranges that have some controls. The controls are often developed and then used by HR compensation experts to help supervisors determine pay for different employees within a pay grade or broadband. And then you can have career bands, which are competency-based progression bands. The book doesn't really talk about career bands, but these can be bands where you have people who are in professions, for example, where they can build competencies over their careers that help them move up in the pay grades, for example, in their organizations. And this is a way to motivate them to build those competencies over their careers. It could also be jobs where things are just changing so much because of technology that you have people really going for competencies rather than going for specific job roles with specific tasks because the tasks are constantly changing and the knowledge, skills, and abilities needed to do those tasks are changing. Career bands operate like broadbands, but instead of just making pay grades and then consolidating pay grades, career bands are thinking about what competencies go within the different bands in that the kind of broadband broad bands that they have within the organization. So here's a visual. I just took some of the graphics from the book to show you what this would look like. So here on the left, we created 7 pay grades. Maybe we have lots of different jobs in this organization. We have some clerical and hourly work. We have some professionals and managers. And so we had 7 pay grades. But maybe we want to consolidate those into 3 to give to make it much easier to think about how people move through these pay grades. So instead they can move through a whole broadband. But it also may give people a little more flexibility in terms of figuring out people's pay as well, depending on who comes in and who you want to retain within the organization. So you go from 7 here pay grades to 3 broad bands on the right. So why do we do broadbanding? It's quite popular in organizations. One, it gives you organizational flexibility. You can place jobs in, it's easier to place jobs in broad bands when the bands are just very broad than to figure out narrowly if you have like 7 job grades where a job goes in 7 grades versus 3. It also can provide flexibility when jobs are changing quite quickly, again, because of technology, like AI, for example, is changing a lot of jobs. So you may want a broadband where these jobs are changing. They may not change so much. They only might change in a job. If you had a pay grade, like traditional pay grades, only 2 or 3 pay grades. But if you used it a broadband, people don't have to change the band that they're in. They can stay in those bands even if the job is changing itself. It de-emphasizes hierarchy because it flattens the pay grade structure, which can go with the strategy of an organization, especially if they want to have a flatter structure. It can encourage skill development. Again, you can create these so that they're based on competencies and that different competencies can move you within a band or even across bands, potentially depending on how the broadbanding is structured in the organization. It can support cultural change. Think about organizations, for example, that are getting rid of middle managers or, again, trying to flatten their hierarchy. This can be a very helpful way to think about pay in terms of changing that whole culture in the way that the hierarchy works, how decisions are made, but also then how pay decisions get made. And then it can link to market-based compensation much more easily because you just have your benchmarking jobs within the broad bands that you need to have market pay for. And then the market pay it could be quite different for different jobs, even within that broad band. But because it's a broad band and not a pay grade, you don't have to change the pay within a pay grade because the broad band should be broad enough that pay doesn't have to change necessarily. When I say pay doesn't have to change, the midpoint, or max might not have to change very much because you have a broad band where it has lots of different jobs kind of combined in that broader band than a pay grade where it might be a job family in each pay grade. But some job families may be moving faster in terms of their pays going up faster because of changes in the industry, a lack of people in those jobs, that sort of thing. So a typical number of bands is about 5. Again, if you're in a larger organization, you could have more than that and you're still broadbanding because you may have had multiple, like dozens and dozens of pay grades. You can also have fewer, like that example that I showed from the book had only 3. If you have a smaller organization, you don't need 5 bands. You could go from 7 to 3 and that would still be a reasonable broadbanding. Your bases for your bands can be your hierarchy or market price. So what is the market price for different jobs? If the market prices are somewhat similar, you could combine job grades within the hierarchy. So like maybe job grades 1, 2, and 3 are combined into one broadband, for example. You could also do it by job families or occupations. So maybe your first broadband is your clerical jobs. Your second broadband is your professionals. Your third job broadband, sorry, is managers. You could do something like that as well. That means that the ranges spread much more than they did for pay grades. So I think pay grades, it was somewhere between 25 and 60%. In a broadband, your pay ranges can be 100 to 400% within a broadband or even across broadbands. There are some concerns, even though a lot of organizations are using broadbanding, it can lead to higher costs. This is often because managers, since they have a broadband now, they have more flexibility in terms of how they pay their employees. And a lot of supervisors are not responsible for budgets or don't know anything more than the budget for their department. And so they may not they may not realize that when they're increasing people's pay, they may be increasing the cost for the organization. Supervisors may also see a broadband and think that they can increase pay more than they would if it were narrower pay grades. So one way that HR can help avoid the higher costs is within broadbands, they can give example jobs or benchmark jobs within those broadbands and then help supervisors use those jobs to figure out where a job is or a job role is for a specific employee, and then how much would be appropriate to increase their pay. So instead of supervisors seeing the whole broadband as like all of the pay that an employee could have in their job position, these examples or benchmark jobs help them narrow that band down to what's more appropriate in terms of the market or in terms of the internal value of that job. You could have potential discrimination if you have women and people of color are in certain jobs that are getting paid less. And broadbanding can hide that because broadbanding, since it groups so many jobs together, it may not be obvious that, oh, people who are in pay grade 1, for example, are mostly women and people of color. But as you move up through the pay grades, it's more men and white people. If you do a broadband, you're going to mix, maybe 1, 2, and 3 together, and then you can't see that that certain groups of social groups are in certain kinds of broadbands. This is not to say that the pay differences is discrimination, but one problem is when you go to court, sometimes all people have to do is show that there is a pattern. They don't have to know the why behind the pattern. So if that's the case, if you're in HR, what you're going to do is you're going to check compensation for different groups within your organization to make sure that they're moving up in pay as quickly as other groups. My last job before I got my PhD, they did this quite a bit. It was a university. So then you get pay increases. A lot of people, including myself, got pay increases because of the difference between my pay and other people within my we did not have broadbands, we had pay grades, but within my pay grade were quite different from mine from year to year. You also have market alignment challenges because you have so many benchmark jobs within a broadband that can be very hard to ensure that every job, even if it's not a benchmark job or it may or may not be close to a benchmark job, that it's aligned with the market because the bands are just so broad. You can have employee identity issues where they're not sure why they're in a broadband and they can't place their job or themselves within that broadband. A pay grade is very easy to explain to an employee, like here's the pay grade for these kinds of jobs. You can move up in the pay grade. If you get promoted, you would move out of the pay grade. In a broadband, that may not be the case. You can't, the band is so big that it's hard to explain to an employee. You may not be able to move all the way to the top of this band without getting promoted. But even if you get a promotion, you don't leave this band because it's so broad. You're still in the same band, but now you're in kind of a higher level of the band in terms of pay. And then there can be implementation challenges, trying to consolidate all of the pay grades that you had before into these broadbands and communicating those changes and then making sure that pay increases are still going with the strategy of the organization and market pricing.